So what is the best age for playing video games? Well, the simple answer would be whatever age you currently are, whether you're elderly aged, middle aged, younger aged, or heck, for any babies watching right now, grab your boopy, grab a controller, and you're ready to get gaming there, partner. Ironically, there used to be a time when people said video games were only for kids, but then all the kids who were told that grew up and said that's a stupid rule, and now we're the adults, we make the rules. And just because most adults' lives aren't fun doesn't mean they can't be. Personally, I need video games in my life. I got an open invitation for somebody to take the controller out of my hand. No takers yet. But yeah, these days you don't hear nearly as many people saying video games are only for kids. Same goes for a lot of other things as well. They wouldn't make onesies for people who are 6'4" otherwise. In any case, now that it's become more accepted to play video games at all ages, not to mention the good old I don't care what other people think mindset, it is a very curious question to consider. Which age is indeed the best? Playing games as a kid certainly gets romanticized. I'm definitely guilty of doing that myself. I mean, am I wrong? Many of us had some great times playing games as a kid, and we didn't even need that many games to do it. But even if we did want to say that playing games as a kid was the best time, there's still a lot of different stages of being a kid. When you're older, things don't feel like they change as much, but when you're a kid, each year can feel drastically different than the next. I mean, something like going from second grade to third, talk about some serious I'm a big kid now vibes. Plus, there's always the teenager years and young adult life phases as well. It's certainly not as simple as being either a kid or an adult. Although, I suppose you could say that a lot of us are still kids at heart. Personally, I've always felt like kind of an old geezer at heart. And hey, speaking of geezers, the jury's still out on how sweet the geezer gaming life could be, since video games haven't yet existed long enough for those who grew up with video games to age into geezerhood. I've talked about retirement homes for gamers before, and I'm telling you, it's gonna be a thing. But regardless of what age a person is, whether it be at heart or according to your biological clock, the first big factor I want to talk about is free time. Ah, yes indeed. Because you know what you can cash in free time for? That's right, game time, baby. For a lot of us, the most free time we ever had was as kids. Basically, just had to deal with school back then, and other than that, not a lot of responsibilities. Adults would deal with that stuff. Haha, those suckers. Ah, shoot, now we're the adults. On the flip side, the big advantage you always hear about being an adult over being a kid is that as an adult, you can do whatever you want. Sure you can, after you're done doing the stuff you don't want to do, which can seemingly never end. Also, I'm not so convinced by the argument that kids can't do what they want. The kids I observe seem to always do what they want. They might get yelled at to not do it, but they still do it anyways, at least for a little while. I mean, if I could really do whatever I wanted to as an adult, I'd love to blast cars that drive too fast down my street with my super soakers. And yet, it's never happened. Wait, would that go against my mantra? In any case, I would argue that being able to do whatever you want in theory loses to being able to actually do whatever you want more often in practice. And I'd argue kids have the upper hand there, and especially when it comes to playing video games. Although, certainly not in every situation. I know some adults will just stay up all night playing games. Another advantage that I'd say kids have is that they're much better about playing games guilt-free. Something many of you adults have told me is that even when you finally do find time to play video games, there's often a lot of guilt that comes with it. Talk about a bummer. That's like cooking a meal, and by the time it's all prepared, you're not hungry for it anymore. Or dedicating your entire life to a profession only to realize you hate it. Haha, whoops. Point is, if you can't enjoy playing video games carefree, it takes away from the enjoyment. You might feel compelled to stop sooner than you would have wanted to otherwise, or maybe even have a feeling like you're doing something wrong, a major buzzkill. But when a kid plays video games, more often than not, that's all they're thinking about. Personally, I don't remember feeling much guilt at all about playing video games until I got to high school. I suppose depending how serious of a student you are or how good you are at balancing your life, that could be stretched out a bit longer. I'd imagine gaming is a geezer to be geared towards being guilt-free as well. I mean, every grandparent I've ever met seems pretty set in their ways, with everyone around them just having a, well, they're too old to change, so screw it. I can just imagine it now. Myself as an elderly man, and my family being told to just leave me be as I play Battletoads. He's trying to beat the game before he's dead. Just leave him alone and let him play. But that raises another good question. What is the ideal age to be playing video games as far as how capable you are? I can only imagine what 117 years of daily CRT TV use will have done to my vision by that point, and what will my body's motor skills and reflexes be like by then? I feel like I'm the best I ever was at video games right now, and it's been that way for a while. As a kid, I was terrible at games, although it certainly didn't help that Nintendo and Sega Genesis were the consoles I played the most at that point, with a lot of difficult games. And as much as it was still fun to play games, even though I sucked at them, I do think it makes it a lot more enjoyable when you're better at them. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm amazing at video games, but I do feel like I'm at least capable of beating most of my games by this point, and it allows me to get so much more out of them. Imagine if you could only watch the opening 10 or 15 minutes of a movie. That ain't cutting the mustard. Okay, but what about your ability to obtain games? This is where most adults have an advantage, being able to buy whatever games they want. Well, maybe not some of them anymore. For most adults, having enough games to play generally isn't an issue, especially with all the different ways you can do it nowadays. But as kids, it certainly could be. Having just a handful of games that you had to bank on was fairly common back in the day. Although I will say that nowadays for kids growing up, that seems to be less of a problem, with many parents being more accepting of video games. Not to mention wanting to play games for themselves. You'll get a turn when daddy's done. Finally, the last factor I'd like to talk about is what video games were available at certain points in your life. For example, somebody might love their early teenage years because that's when they played the PlayStation 2 and they're a really big fan of that console. I mean, no matter what age you are, it seems like everyone gets accused of being biased towards whichever gaming consoles they grew up with. Same goes for other things like movies too. How many of today's kids do you see going around saying 2001: A Space Odyssey is the best movie ever? Not many. Because of how impressionable our years as kids are, this makes me tend to think the answer for the best age to play video games at would be your childhood. If I had to give my personal answer, it would be the years when you're an older kid, probably right before the teenage years. That way, you still have a lot of the carefree qualities of life that come from being a kid without the responsibilities that start creeping in as you get closer to becoming an adult. But you're still old enough that you're not complete garbage at playing the games. And hey, maybe you've even got an allowance or something like that you can use for getting more games. Or, you know, a sugar daddy or sugar mama for a parent that will get you stuff. I gotta say though, the idea of retiring to games sounds pretty good. Forget vacationing in Tahiti, I just want to play Super Monkey Ball. Actually, I could just play Super Monkey Ball in Tahiti. That's it, now I'm sold. Time to Rip Van Winkle this thing to retirement. But that's my answer. I'd be curious what your answer is. It could either be what you think is the best age in general, or whatever the best age for you personally was or is, and of course, why. So with that, leave your answers down below, and I will see ya in the next video.
the Retrobird, yeah. And he's talking about video games. He's the